Great. Okay. Thank you for getting that together. We're going to call the meeting of the Reparations Commission to order. And we have 6 of 9 members in attendance. So we'll move ahead with the agenda since we do have a quorum. The first order of business is to reflect on the last meeting at New Northside Church. And so I'll start because I actually took made some comments about what I heard during that meeting. It started, first of all, the attendance was better than I initially expected when we first walked in. That was good, and people were very engaged and very expressive. So they really came there for business. The meeting started with a couple of attendees talking about lineage-based reparations and that rather cash payments should be first and foremost. But the bulk of the attendees are really talking about the actual structural reforms that were needed. I can read a couple of comments. They wanted to address the repercussions of a restrictive social system. They asked how would reparations be funded? Will this commission actually continue to ensure that there's appropriate distribution? And then the last comment was, how are these reparations going to be sustained? Will there be a trust fund to ensure that whatever money is allocated remains secure and within a lockbox? So those were really powerful comments. There were comments made about lionizing the pioneers, which we certainly agreed with, and addressing structural issues, providing housing loans, underwriting education costs, zero interest business loans. Those are all kind of the structural issues that we heard in the first 2 meetings. So overall, I found that there were pretty much the same themes articulated in this meeting as the first 2. So that gave a lot of validity to what has been said. I'll turn it over to anyone else who wants to reflect.
I can speak. Yeah, I do agree. I think everyone was engaged, and there were a lot of good questions and comments, and a lot of concerns about, lineage-based compensation and everything. I think a lot of people also they recommended something sustainable as well for us to consider when having these conversations. So I feel like that was also great as well. I pretty much had the same questions that you wrote down, Dr. Ross. So also, I guess to note, I think Dr. Gwynn's instruction or lecture was also beneficial to everyone as well. And I feel like it was very educational, and a lot of people learned a lot of new things about the history of St. Louis. So.
Yes, thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, one of the things that I appreciated as an extension to Gwen's presentation was there were others who made comments who helped add it to that historical context about St. Louis and its issues. That was, I think, particularly helpful for me. Learn more about the issues, especially as it related to housing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was I thought it was extremely helpful.
Good. I absolutely concur. Other thoughts or opinions about that? About the overall meeting, rather?
I just have
I'm
wondering.
What's that?
I just have things I'm wondering about having not been in attendance. The flow public comments, how would you categorize those? Were they questions, storytellings, advice? How would you categorize, like, the nature of the comments?
I think they were both. I think that they were mostly statements to the commission, and those statements were followed by very specific recommendations. There were, again, it was peppered with questions. So I think there was a bit of all of that in there.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I just remember an email coming in, and it was kind of I can't remember whether it was a critique or it was a question about our process. And so as we're going along, I'm just thinking about our process. I know we outline our agenda, but there's all these different tools, Am I echoing?
Hold on a second. That's me.
Okay. So, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering how we're doing with our process, and whether the processes that we're doing, I want to just be mindful that is going to get us to where we are. And what provoked that thought is that over 4th of July weekend, someone sat down and just started telling me all these stories about his family that go back to 1700s, right? And a lot of those stories had receipts about what actually happened to his Black family in St. Louis. And it was just so interesting, because like, if I didn't know this person, just alone on human relationship alone, the power of that storytelling really was like, wow, this is unjust. And I would want that family to have equity. And so, a lot of the grassroots work talks about storytelling as a tool for change, and also seeing what needs to happen. And so that's what I'm thinking about, all these things. Like, are we providing ample opportunity for that within the commission meetings? What do you all think?
The answer is yes. That narratives are a powerful part of this commission, that we should respond to those narratives. They should be memorialized and amplified in whatever we produce, just as much as the actual questions and the statements. And so the answer is yes, we need the narratives as much as we need the other elements of the commission meetings. I don't think anyone would disagree with that.
No, I agree with that. And I think there's been a reasonable amount of storytelling in our public forums. I do agree that, the stories do carry power. And I think it would be critically important to be able to reach back as we begin to determine, next steps, and how we come up with recommendations to pour the power of the stories into those recommendations as we go forward. But no, I think you are spot on. Yeah.
Other thoughts?
I think that when we had our earlier discussions and we're planning out these meetings, that was really the intent behind having the public comments to get those stories. And so I do think that that's an important piece. And as we move forward with the work, those stories are what are helping to craft our topics of research and really determine a lot of what we are are looking to do and produce out of these meetings. So I think that absolutely we can't do any of this without the storytelling, because that's the historical context. A lot of it is captured in the stories where it's not captured otherwise. So I think that that is, but I was going to ask Commissioner Franks if you could just go a little further with that. Like, were you only just wanting to know if we were, I guess I'm basically saying say more, because I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, there's an idea behind my question.
Okay.
I'm being a lawyer, suggestion by question. Well, I just had an idea about a project and about what if we could, as a commission, provide a space for storytelling, and we use maybe like the assistance of a local journalist, and it could be broadcast through this TV, and we just open up the channel, and it's just put like a flowing public comment session, and people can sit and be storytellers.
Are we looking for, are you speaking of particular stories or?
No, it's open mic. So it'd be like open mic, and all it is storytelling sessions. That's it. So we would open up this stream, and that's it. That's the whole point. Is like we're just collecting stories. And so we have this forum here, this STL TV, right? And so it could be, I don't know, it could be a night, and it could be like 2 hours, and people can sign up, and they tell their stories, and we sit and listen, the public sits and listens, and it's just an open mic to capture and record those stories. And maybe a person gets, I don't know, each person gets a little bit longer time at public comment to do that as part of our process.
I don't see that anything would prevent us from doing that. I think that would be adjunctive of an important adjunct to what's being done in the actual commission meetings. And so I think that's worthy to have a greater conversation about how to do that practically. But I think that could be a powerful part of it. I wouldn't have any disagreements with that.
I would say along those lines, because I agree that trying to open up the space that we can provide for narratives and stories is really important, especially as Dr. Ross is saying, as an adjunct and to augment what we're doing during our public meetings and our planning meetings. Along those lines, I'm just thinking about the platforms. You know, this is certainly one of those platforms, but there are some barriers to this as well, though. I mean, people need to, I'm just thinking about sometimes when we have to ourselves get online for these kinds of things, it can be a little bit tricky. And then thinking about being inclusive of people who might not have smooth access to the internet, et cetera. But there are nonprofit initiatives that have these mobile studios that you know, kind of they announce where they're going to be located. It looks like a trailer oftentimes. I don't know if any of you have ever seen these. It looks like a trailer, and people can come out and they actually get to sit in the studio for, you know, usually there's some bounded time, but it's a lot longer than what we typically provide during meetings. And it gets recorded at high quality as well. And then it can be used later on if people are willing to allow their stories to be presented. I'm just thinking, given the import of our work, I imagine that some of these organizations would actually be interested in partnering, you know, and providing some of these kinds of things at low or no cost. So just a thought about platform.
Humans of St. Louis is really great at capturing narratives, right? And providing a space, but yeah, so that's where I'm going with this.
Okay, well, that's on the front burner for exploration. I'm glad you mentioned Humans of St. Louis. I know people involved there, and so let's do some homework on that particular recommendation, and we'll all kind of investigate this a little bit more. So thank you.
I'm willing to work on that.
Thank you so much. So let's move on, because it's 6:20. We want to get through a lot. I got home at 6 and I haven't eaten dinner, so this is not going to go past 7 o'clock. We know what worked. Let's talk about what could be improved. in that last session. I know you weren't there, Kimberly, but we can talk about were there nuances that prohibited free expression? Were there, just technical issues? I'll start also. Having the microphone only in the front, I thought was it didn't lend to the ability to express this directly to the commission. It's as if the questioners were sending the questions to the audience. And we want to ensure that this is the intent is to have information received by the commission, and having the microphone in that way, even though we heard everything, it was received. It wasn't consistent with what our plans were in terms of the overall aesthetics of a commission meeting. So we really would not want to have that again. We want to have the microphone available in the within the audience, so they can then share within the audience rather than coming up to the podium. Other thoughts, other concerns about what could work better?
I would second that mic location. I was not at the meeting in person, but I did see online, and it was positioned in a way where you don't get the full view, but it also it just seemed different than in previous meetings, and at a bit of an awkward position. I also there was one more point about what could have been improved. I lost it, so I'll come back to it if we're still within this session.
Okay. Any other comments about what could have been improved? I think the richness of the discussion was there. The content was really good. And so I really left inspired by the comments that were made. If there are no more comments, we'll go on to the next next agenda topic. My computer's working, so I can read everything now. The next agenda topic reads research topics. And so I want to take kind of take a little time to think about, before we go into research topics, I want to get back to what we heard from that second meeting and it delves into the research topic. A strong statement was made about us needing greater representation on the commission. Greater representation, some gentleman spoke of the need to have more business leaders and economists. In fact, he really nailed that. I absolutely agree wholeheartedly. We need to have an economist, and there are others who could represent different areas of thought. Those people, obviously, the commission is working under the the mayoral authority, and so the 9 people were there, and there's really won't be a precedent for adding new members, but they certainly could occupy working groups. And so I want us to think about who we would want in those working groups, and then based on how we would extend those working groups, then we can talk about what research should we explore. So thoughts about additional members for working groups, apart from the 9 of us. And we shouldn't come up with names. I think we should just talk about generic positions or generic areas where we need expertise.
I would suggest educator. An educator, maybe someone who worked. I'll just say educator. someone within that background to not at the higher academic levels, such as, you know, where you and Dr. Cunningham are, but perhaps that could speak to, if we're really thinking in terms of researching the educational angle and how closing these schools, for example, in neighborhoods, and just that impact, what that looks like, what that has, the ripple effect there, what they've seen on that secondary education level and really early childhood as well.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk about childhood education, the impact of school closings, so many other policy issues. I think that's a great idea. And so
Just to have, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, David.
Oh, I was just just noting, just to have out there, it seems like if we're looking to other commissions and thinking about, well, how did they bound the areas and think about the kinds of the equivalent of the working groups that we're talking about now, I think the big four that we see everywhere, and I think this really overlaps with DeLachey's point just now, is the emphasis, there seems to be an emerging consensus that the emphasis should be on health, wealth, housing, and education are kind of the four kind of umbrella areas that people have been working in. So certainly we just mentioned education, and it doesn't mean we need to follow those, but just if we want to think about fairly standardized areas, those might be some to at least begin with.
Yeah, I think those categories are great. And so we already talked about education, and we can expand that with a working group. We can have more than two people, more than one person. I started out by saying we need an economist or someone who really can talk about the financial consequences of rigid segregation and socioeconomic disadvantages. Health is going to be a key part, and I was asked to talk about health at the next meeting, and I'll just spend 10 minutes introducing that topic, but we can certainly use additional members who can talk about health, particularly community health and housing. When you mentioned housing, one person who really came to mind is Chris Cremeyer, who is the CEO of Beyond Housing. I think someone who could speak to that. I mean, there are others who can speak to that, but my goodness, he has such a track record of actual knowing the subject and actually living it and producing. So I like those, education, wealth, health, housing. I think those categories are great, David.
Yeah. And just two quick comments on that too is, one, as I was saying that, I realized that an area, at least I personally would want to propose potentially augmenting our list would be something around the criminal legal system. And so just to have that out there as a potential fifth one. And then the other thing, as you were just mentioning housing, I have a colleague in the sociology department I'm in named Elizabeth Corver-Glenn, and Elizabeth would be willing to work on a working group if we wanted to, but she's also a good example because I could imagine ways of addressing housing that really focus on kind of flashpoint policies that affect large numbers of people in a very identifiable way. So thinking about Mill Creek Valley is like a really clear example of that. But Elizabeth focuses on kind of like daily quotidian practices of real estate appraisers and how they in effect reproduce racist and racial inequalities just through the daily practice of that field. So just appraisals. And it's just an example of something, it's not invisible. Obviously, if you're impacted by this, you feel where this happens, but it's just kind of the daily practice that isn't something that people just reach out and identify as like, this is the heart of the problem. But it seems like a good example of something where we have people in a working group who are really attuned to those daily practices. The person you mentioned from Beyond Housing would probably be another person that could really be attuned to that, as well as people who can think historically about these large policy moments like Mill Creek Valley, where neighborhoods would be razed or erased, et cetera. And so just to make an appeal for trying to think about a combination of people who can hit on kind of both sides of that.
Appreciate that. Elizabeth, what was her last name?
Corver Glenn. I'll put it in the chat so you can spell it.
Thanks.
So I just want to get some clarification or to say something. So I think it's definitely important to identify these areas of focus, but I question whether it's necessary that the person spearheading or occupying the group are experts. And I come at this from, I remember being just, and I say this like happily, admonished by Kayla about some language here, which is like, I said something like, oh, give me the gavel. And she said, well, I'm an abolitionist. Well, I share that perspective too in my approach. So like, I'm thinking broader about the culture of our commission, what it is we're talking about, right? We're talking about reparations, which are like tools. It's a tool to bring equity in the face of oppression, of an oppressive system. And so they say that you'll never be able to dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. So there's all these tools here and there's barriers. So I feel like a lot of this conversation is focused on, like, all of us pretty much almost are pretty educated elite here. So I feel like some of the people that are probably most experiencing the feel of inequity are not in this room right now and not able to curate what this looks like, right? So I feel like when it comes to diversity of representation, that we need to take a look at that. And we need to take a look at things like, I feel like it's very important how we set up the space for our meetings. Do we want this to look like a traditional board meeting? All right, is that going, or does this look, can this look like something else? Can this look different, right? Because we're trying to unravel something and also correct something. So from that perspective, I think there's definitely experts that have been studying things and they can provide information for them. But yes, let's divide the areas, but also let's think about who do we need to tap for these conversations. Who can we think about some different types of leadership in these areas?
So community voices are critical.
Mhm.
I would agree wholeheartedly. And I would gather that we will want to have community voices on all these different work groups.
Mhm.
Just a community group, but they should influence or should be able to impart their thoughts and backgrounds into every single group. They really should be the thrust of what we do when we create the groups.
I also think that there should be some leadership, opportunity there for the community voices. That all of our leaders should not necessarily be academia, professional experts. So I would like to see us have some diversity in that regard.
Yeah, so community presence, community leaders. I think, yes, I think we would all agree with that. Thank you. So any other broad groups that we should focus on? We can discuss. We'll have some time to talk about how we're going to constitute those working groups. So I want to make sure that we've thought about the broad category.
Okay, this is what I've kind of written down, and this might overlap. I've got financial, environment, and we already covered health and education, the public service realm, like elected officials and nonprofit realm, and then civic realm.
So you were talking about groups, or are you just talking about people who should be in the groups?
I'm talking about areas
Okay.
in which reparations and inequities lie. So we have things that rest in the nonprofit industrial complex, right? We have things resting in the civic influence in that civic realm. So I'm looking at those categories that I think merit examination, merit scrutiny.
Okay, I understand that, but we really have a limited workforce to deal with.
Right.
We're not going to be able to accommodate multiple working groups if we're really going to have some thoughtful discussion. I think it's best that we have 4 to 5 categories and that we collapse everything that you said. I think I
Right.
agree. I think we can, with those, so most of those can be collapsed into those 5 categories. You added one that I did put there, and that was environmental. So we have essentially education, economics, financial, 2, health, 3, housing, 4, criminal justice, environmental. Then you mentioned community presence and leaders. I don't consider it a second, an additional group, because that will be woven throughout all of the groups.
Yeah, just want to throw it out for discussion.
Yeah.
So those are things, so
How do you feel about that?
definitely up for discussion, and we can whittle it down from there. If anybody else has thoughts on it.
So I agree with those 6 areas, and I do think that community leaders fall within all of them, as do those that are considered the experts. I think if we want to have, I feel like a panel discussion versus a speaker presentation would allow for us to have 2 or 3 there, so that you have represented those groups. You have your community leader, you have your expert, and I'm using that word, but you know, in their own way, community leaders are experts too on the ground. So I don't want to take away from that as well. But I think to have a 2 or 3 person panel,
Yeah.
that would also help with collapsing some of this, because to Dr. Ross's point, we can't, it'll get too big after a while.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, within our working groups and within our speaker presentations, our panels, we can really touch on all that. You know, we can present in that way. But I think community voices are the driving voices for sure of a lot of this. And I think in concert with the academia as well, to kind of balance. So I think they can work together, kind of a both and situation.
Yes, good. Good discussion. Great discussion. So I think we should look at these categories that we have. We'll share that, and then we have to spend the next few weeks really thinking about how to populate these working groups. Once they're populated, then we can ask what specific research questions should we pose, in addition to what we're going to be compiling in the actual commission meetings. So I think it's going to follow fairly organically how we do this.
Mhm.
And everyone, is there agreement on that or thoughts about that?
I certainly agree with that. And also the premise of not expanding our work too far and wide, and it becomes a way for us to get to where we need to be.
Yeah, I agree, Reverend. Become unwieldy. Okay, well, good. That's good discussion. Excellent discussion. Now let's move on to speakers. And we had already talked about, these 2 major speakers that we want, Walter Johnson and Colin Gordon, and trying to ensure that we can get those top speakers will be critical before we will move on. So I want us to be careful in really thinking about how many speakers. Our goal is not to have multiple major presentations to the public. Our charge is to listen to the public, not lecture to the public. And so my personal recommendation is that we really not have an extensive list of speakers. We want to have, maybe two really deeply thoughtful leaders in the field, and then we can have a couple, all of us can, come in, in our small areas of expertise the way Gwen did at the last session. I think that works better. There was a name placed on the agenda, Devarian Baldwin, as a potential speaker. Let me speak against that. Devarian Baldwin is just a remarkable person, thoughtful, crafty, highly energetic, sophisticated, a true scholar. But his scholarship is tends to be not as expansive as we need for this commission. This tends to be sometimes too directionally focused. We want individuals who, when we bring in scholars, we want individuals who really look across the entire landscape and speak to that. And so that's why, again, I mean, he's a great speaker, but we don't have time for a whole lot of speakers. And that's why if we can get Colin Gordon and Walter Johnson, I don't think we would need any more than that, nor will we have time for anything more than that. Other thoughts about that?
I don't know why he's recommended, but I'll trust your scrutiny. What about Christopher Tinson over at SLU?
I think it's probably good to have somebody who's local. We said that at the inception of this, that we really want to tap into our local experts. And so I think that's much more of a reasonable option.
I don't know, and I say all of that without, I know his name came up on the initial list, and so he has his angle, and he would be modest enough to be like, well, yeah, you got this person on the short list, and I would tender things over to this person, but he's chair of Black Studies.
Yes.
Over at SLU. Pretty tuned in.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I think it's important that we have although we don't really want to have more than two major speakers, we have to have a contingency plan, because some of these speakers just may not pan out for lots of reasons.
And maybe along those lines, another way to broaden our speaker base a little bit without it taking up more of our meetings is, I think I had mentioned this before, but another professor of Black Studies in the area is Jeff Ward, who is at WashU, but he has co-taught with Walter Johnson. They have kind of coordinated classes at Harvard and at WashU. And so they work together really well. And so if Walter is coming to speak, I'm sure he and Jeff could coordinate, and we'd have kind of I know Walter is local to St. Louis in a lot of ways, very close to the community, but Jeff is in the community as well. And they might work well together without it taking up two separate meetings.
I think that's great. I'd love to see the chair of Black Studies at SLU and WashU. So I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts? Okay. So we really have to try to get commitments from Walter Johnson and Colin Gordon within the next month. If we can't nail them down by the end of August, then we just move on to the people that we have here locally.
I'm sorry, Dr. Ross, I just want, excuse me, to add that in the outreach, I've been on communications that Dr. Mitchell has sent out to prospective speakers, and calendars are filling up quickly. And so it would be helpful on our end to have dates to offer And
Yes.
that has been some of the hang up as well with some of the speakers, especially the ones who are in academia. A few of them have responded that for the summer, they're pretty much tied up doing whatever they're doing, but they're opening their calendars for the fall. But we don't have dates to offer for the fall. So I think as a commission, we really need to be mindful of that as we are wanting to have speakers come in. And even on the local level, we just need to have dates to offer as well, and just keeping that in mind.
Yes, and so at the beginning, I know we had operated under this premise that many of us knew Walter Johnson and Colin Gordon and could get them to commit. We knew the commission dates, they were already there. And so we'll now have to just go back and present specific dates to these two preferred speakers. I shouldn't say preferred speakers, but to the first speakers, and then go from there. And so Vernon is the one who knew Walter Johnson and could get that contact. And so Vernon's not on the call. So we'll have to follow up with Vernon and state, preference, would be the September and October meeting. By November, we really want to start wrapping up and collating information for a report, which we want to share with the public in the latter 3 months. So, we really, frankly, it's my recommendation that we really have September and October for those major speakers. We can do the other speakers maybe at another time.
So perhaps Dr. Ross, may I suggest that maybe we just take a vote and have that motion made and move forward with that as a motion, as an action for us as a commission?
I think that's great. So are you making that, what motion do you want to make the motion?
I make the motion that we, as a commission, vote on the format for the next 3 meetings. For August. Well, Dr. Ross, you're August, correct? Presenting July.
July.
Okay, so August through December, that we set a format and we agree to that format and move forward with our speakers, our process.
I'm not so sure I'm following that.
I know that wasn't very clear, so let me retract. I make the motion that we vote on a format for our meetings, August through December, and that we use those meetings to then go ahead and set our research and to work the remainder of the time that we have. So January through March. So we don't keep having these discussions around speakers and what we're going to be presenting, and we can actually get to work. Can we just agree with your recommendation that we focus in on this speaker format that you suggested, that we discussed, and move forward, so we don't have another meeting of how are we going to do this?
So a friendly amendment would be to highlight September and October as the times for the 2 major speakers.
Okay.
And I wouldn't want to I don't think we should try to do anything later than that. Do you accept that amendment?
To wrap by October, to wrap with the October meeting?
No, to have the 2 major speakers in either September or October.
Okay, I accept that amendment.
Okay, so it has been moved by Delashay that we really structure the next upcoming meetings up until January to accommodate speakers, but reserve the months of September and October for our major speakers. So that's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No extensions? Okay, so it is so moved. Great. Great. I think that's good to clear that up. Thank you, Delashay. which really gets us into the last part of the meeting now. The last 5 minutes is to talk about the meeting dates and locations for September and October. On the initial calendar, we actually stated we want to go to South City, South County, or South City is a city, South City for the next two meetings after July. And so in terms of dates and locations, hold on a second, let me put my calendar. So we're talking about September. And we talked about balancing them weekday and weekend, so we can get a different slice of the populace.
To that point, may I ask if we felt that that weekend session was helpful in terms of turnout? Does that seem, since we've had a couple of meetings where we've had them during the week and we've had weekend to kind of see, is that helpful?
I thought the turnout was relatively comparable at the meeting on the weekend. I thought the response, I thought the questions were deeper, and I thought the engagement was richer, but the turnout I thought was comparable.
Okay. So do we want to consider another weekend and weekday for these two meetings, perhaps?
Yes, I think because August is a Saturday meeting on August 26th. So I think alternating was fine. And I would like to see how the August meeting turns out, because the one that we had on this past weekend where we tested it out, there was a bunch of things going on in the city. So it kind of affected the turnout. So I feel like if less distractions, we can kind of get a good sense on how a weekend would actually turn out without, all the events that were going on.
Yeah, I agree with that. We may not be able to confirm dates right now.
I just want to forewarn, we should probably check the calendar, the city calendar for that weekend in August, and here's why. The St. Louis turns up with festivals in August. It's heavy. It's really, really, really thick. That's what I tell everybody about. Like, I tell people it's the best time of the year to come to St. Louis. So we could stay with that for the sake of turnout. Maybe consider a Sunday instead, but I like that all. We should double check. I'm for.
We talked about that.
We
talked about that on this meeting when we did the planning for it. We know Festival of Nations is one thing going on that weekend, but we talked about it at the meeting where we decided on that date to narrow it down to that date with consideration to those items. But we did have an in-depth conversation around that.
Okay, well, no sense in rehashing.
Okay, so did we come up with a date in September?
I've got.
I don't believe we have.
I don't believe we did.
I didn't think we did.
We got a planning meeting on the calendar for September 13th. So my assumption is that the meeting is the following
16th.
Wednesday.
Or the following Wednesday, the 20th of September.
Well, we have a planning meeting for September 13th.
Well, the planning meetings are the second Wednesday of every month. So that was to get them on our calendar. The public meeting doesn't necessarily take place a week after, but the planning meeting is set for the second Wednesday of every month.
So I'm looking at the calendar, and so we have to agree on either 16th or the 23rd, maybe a weekend, because as Bill just said, we want to just test out, make sure that without a lot of competing events, we can do a weekend. So I would recommend that we consider the 16th or the 23rd of September.
But we did the weekend, and we're doing the weekend in August, so I thought we were alternating and like, for me personally as a commissioner, the weekends are a huge burden.
Okay, but that's reasonable. I'm okay
Yeah.
with that. So let's throw out some dates then.
If we wanted to stay consistent with our weekday kind of last week of the month, would something like the 27th work for folks? It's the last Wednesday in September.
I think September 27th is a good idea. And we'll put it somewhere in South City. Anyone opposed to September 27th? We're gonna have exceptions. We're busy people. We can all be.
I think the 27th sounds good.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm fine.
Okay, good. That is confirmed. Do we want to do October, or we want to just hold off on that?
Can we get October? That would be helpful for the speakers
Mhm.
for trying to get speakers.
Yeah, okay, I would agree.
Fourth Saturday,
A Saturday,
fourth
uh,
Saturday.
fourth Saturday, that would be 28th. October 28th, how does that sound?
I won't be here, but that don't rely the decision on me.
I won't be available that weekend either, but I can absolutely help with the planning of it.
What about the prior weekend, the 21st? I won't be there 21st, I will be out of town.
Well, Dr. Ross, for the ones where you won't be present, we definitely need to make sure that Chair Reed is available.
Okay, so
We can maybe hold off if need be, if the 28th is not what we'll go with, and if it's the 21st tentatively, we'll try to connect with Chair Reed for that one.
yeah, I would like to be here if we have a major speaker in October, so
Okay.
I would try to find some date that accommodate as many of us as possible.
So if the 28th
And-
works
and-
for the majority,
So let's say tentative 28th, and we'll talk with Kayla. Sounds good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, good. I think that we have completed our agenda in a
Well,
timely.
In terms of location, I did, so we discussed possible locations, St. Mary's and St. Cecilia's, and I did reach out to St. Cecilia and inquire about their spaces. So they don't have anyone there to assist with setup. So there would be some labor involved with that. So it's like, yeah, we don't have anybody there to help set up chairs. So if they can't set up chairs, we probably won't have audio visual, but they have the big gymnasium where they have the fish fry every year, and that holds quite a bit of people. And somebody does plug in audio visual. I just don't know that the acoustics would be.
Yeah, the
that
acoustics,
great.
I know St. Mary's acoustics aren't great. We just had a Missouri Foundation for Health.
St. Cecilia.
Okay, you're talking about St. Cecilia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know that church. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable. I do know that we talked about the machinist hall on Shoto. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it flowed from, we were trying to get closer to like Dutchtown, so further deeper into South City.
Okay, so I don't think we should write off the place in Shoto. I think that could bring in a very good sector, and then we can move something, I agree, a little bit more in Dogtown.
Oh, no. So Dogtown would not be the South City. So what we had discussed was like possibilities in South City. So I agreed that I would look into it. And I think, I believe Kayla said that she would look into St. Mary's, and also what's the community center down there that was also thrown out. as a contender to move into the area where basically at the heart of the Black community lives in South City. That was the logic in the discussion.
Okay, then we'll have to just wait and have you confirm all that with Kayla then. Because we need, we obviously don't have a specific location yet. Is that agreeable?
Yes.
That certainly by the end of this month, we'll be able to identify a particular location in both areas.
Yeah. So the the feedback from them. So she said she had to check with the priest there, but it's $125 for the space.
Okay,
So I'm just bringing back the information.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, costs like that are nominal. I'm confident we can get that taken care of. Okay, so that's the only major plan going forward. Two major plans going forward. Secure the dates of the two speakers, and then secure the locations in South City. And hopefully we'll have that done in the next few weeks. The next, okay, so we're set then for our next meeting, which will be next week. What's that date?
The 26th.
26th, absolutely. On my calendar, 26th. In that case, I'll see you all on the 26th at New Northside Church. It sounds good.
Adjourn.
Okay,
Officially adjourn us.
okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
So move.
Okay, all in favor? Aye, say aye.
Aye.
We are officially adjourned. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
See you
You all.
soon.
Thanks all. Good night.
Good night.